If you need any visual guides or representation of just how the MAGA movement is right now, and it's just could be temporary, but we hope not, on the fritz, you can look no further than the humiliation J.D. Vance faced last night. Vance was headlining a Turning Points event. He was the top speaker, got the most billing last night. There are events that have been known to pack houses, to be filled to the brim with young MAGA faithfuls who you'd think might show up to see a sitting United States vice president, the heir apparent to Trump and Trumpism. But here's what J.D. Vance looked out and saw instead, a near empty arena. This video is from my colleague Jake Taylor, who was there. He estimates that the arena was less than 25% filled. And tickets were free, so that's not an impediment to attending. But Vance couldn't get anyone to show up. Now, this is not the first bad thing that's happened to J.D. Vance this week. He also used the appearance last night to breathe more air into Donald Trump's politically toxic war with the Pope. Here's the advice that J.D. Vance, who I think is the highest ranking Catholic in the federal government, certainly in the Trump administration, decided to offer the incredibly popular American Pope.
Now, we can, of course, have disagreements about whether this or that conflict is just, but I think that it's important, in the same way that it's important for the Vice President of the United States to be careful when I talk about matters of public policy. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology.
I'm going to bring into our coverage political analyst Molly Jong-Fast. She's the host of Fast Politics and a New York Times contributing opinion writer. Mike Barnicle is still here with us. Mike, you were with us when, I think when Pope Leo began, when the world was first getting to know this Pope. This Pope is incredible. Even if you're not Catholic, I think you're heartened to hear him defend people with less power, people with less privilege, people with less money at this moment when it feels like everyone's fluffing up the richest and most privileged among us. It's also been heartening to hear him say things like, I'm not afraid of Donald Trump. I'm going to say what I believe, when you've seen the most powerful law firms and universities who should have all the standing in our society refuse to do what the Pope's doing. What I didn't think you'd see is J.D. Vance, who is young and has political ambitions, side with one of the most politically toxic things Donald Trump has done, and that is declare war on this Pope.
You know, I think J.D. Vance is smart enough now to have picked up all the negative signals he's getting thrown at him from the Oval Office. It's a setup. I mean, Trump doesn't want any Republican succeeding him. That's the best shot the Democrats have in the next presidential election. He doesn't want J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, anybody. No Republican can succeed him because he's a godlike creature in his own mind. And J.D. Vance going to Pakistan rather, and leaving in 22 hours. Oh, he didn't do the job. That'll be what Trump will say eventually. J.D. Vance picking on the Pope, saying things about the Pope. That goes to J.D. Vance, not Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is gleeful at the failures of his sitting vice president.
Well, J.D. Vance is making it impossible to root for him. I mean, J.D. Vance had a different take. He gave a speech 6 months ago saying we need more God in the public square. And now he's chiding the Pope for talking about issues of morality.
Yeah, and it's not like the Pope was like Donald, he called out Donald Trump, right? He did eventually, but beginning this was about Trump, about the Pope talking about peace, right? And Trump was right, peace and more. Peace and more, that's what the Pope is famous for weighing in for. Like, this is not him wildly out of his lane. And that's why this sort of defense is so wrong, is because he really was talking about war and peace, things that are very much in the Pope's wheelhouse. What I think is super interesting, too, about Vance is you see Vance he has not been on the wings of victory here, right? Like, the whole week has really been a humiliation tour. So he tried to make peace in Iran. We knew that was probably going to be a disaster. That was, just a few hours and a failure. Then he went to see Viktor Orban and help him campaign. That was really looking like it was going to be a failure even before he came in there. But it was certainly, he did not arrive on the wings of victory, nor did he leave. And Orban was defeated. It's sort of a huge win for democracies and democratic norms, and a huge loss for really what J.D. Vance stands for and what he has hitched his brand to so strongly. So it was interesting to see this comes as a week of him just really kind of just plumbing the depths. And Donald Trump did, in fact, set him up for all these things.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Donald Trump set him up, but he's a person with agency. Mike, I think there's something about J.D. Vance calling Trump America's Hitler, the nastiest thing you can say about any living person, describing him as cultural heroin, and then subverting what we know to be his true belief about war in service of Donald Trump, who, as you said, sets him up to fail.
Yeah, do you think Donald Trump has forgotten what J.D. Vance called him several years ago? No. He's got it right up there in the front of his mind. The interesting thing to me about the way both Trump, I know why Trump is so upset about the Pope and gets so upset about the Pope, because Donald Trump, until Pope Leo became Pope, was the most famous American in the world and the most powerful American in the world. Now there's another one. And he's the Pope of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, 1.4 billion followers, faithful followers around the world. And he poses a threat in Donald Trump's, narcissistic mind to him, to Trump. And J.D. Vance, he can almost, but not quite, feel sorry for him because he's in the crosshairs of something that he has no control over, Trump's moods, Trump's anger, Trump's up and down whims. It's a tough position to be in. And the Pope's business is simple to define, and they don't know how to define it. Neither J.D. Vance clearly doesn't know how to define it. Trump certainly doesn't know how to define it. And it is this, to put simply, to care for the least among us, something that neither of those two men stand for, but the Pope does. And the Pope preaches it, and people hear what he says, and people believe what he says. And there's a Catholic church about a quarter of a mile from where I am now in New York City, St. Paul's over in Columbus Avenue. And I often go in there at noontime or 1 p.m. There's no official mass going on. It's just a place of comfort. Joe Biden used to do that. He would drop into a church just to sit and reflect. Not say the rosary, not listen to a mass, not to receive communion, just to sit and reflect on who you are, what life has given you, the gifts that life has given you, to remember all of that, to think about that, to think about your two children, Nicole, or my children, and all of what's going on today around us has, for the first time, when I sit there, made me worry about my grandchildren and the kind of country they're going to be gifted because of what we're enduring right now as a civilization.
Does the Pope give you comfort when you sit there?
I think about the Pope, in terms of, he's a Chicago guy. He's a White Sox fan. I think about him that way. Probably shouldn't, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about him. But I also think about what he's done with his life. I mean, he didn't have a big parish in Chicago or Detroit or anywhere else in the United States. He went to the fields in South America and lived and worked among poor people and helped poor people who were parishioners of his, who were Catholics and non-Catholics alike. And he never changed. And finally, Francis brought him to Rome. One thing led to another. And look now, he's the most viable opponent of Donald J. Trump that exists in the universe.
President is going after the Pope again.
Oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah,
no,
it's
not a good move.
Hot stove. Trump posted last night on social media, quote, "Will someone please tell Pope Leo that Iran has killed at least 42,000 innocent, completely unarmed protesters in the last 2 months, and that for Iran to have a nuclear bomb is absolutely unacceptable. Iran has acknowledged more than 3,000 deaths, while the UN estimates that number to be between 5,000 and 20,000. It is not clear what exactly may have sparked the message from the president. The Pope yesterday morning posted, in part, quote, God's heart is torn apart by wars, violence, injustice, and lies. But our Father's heart is not with the wicked, the arrogant, or the proud. Vice President J.D. Vance also weighed in on the Pope during a Turning Point USA event at the University of Georgia yesterday. Take a look.
Now, we can, of course, have disagreements about whether this or that conflict is just, but I think that it's important, in the same way that it's important for the Vice President of the United States to be careful when I talk about matters of public policy. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. I think one of the issues here is that if you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth. And that's one of the things that I try to do. And it's certainly something I would expect from the clergy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant.
What are you, a king in medieval Europe warning the Pope not to talk about the Bible? That's what you just said. You know how stupid you sound, right? You know how stupid you sound when you, new to the Catholic Church, are lecturing, Mr. Vice President, the pontiff on theology and telling him he should not quote the red letters. Those are the words, by the way, that Jesus spoke. The red letters in the Gospels of Jesus Christ. And by the way, you don't have to, sort through a lot of it. Just look at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers. See, this is his concern.
Did someone ask him, or did he just,
geopolitics. His concern is not geopolitics. His concern is not the fighting his concern has to do with peace. Has to do, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, he is concerned, Jonathan Lemire, with the teachings of Jesus Christ and how utterly bizarre. People will look back one day and laugh when they have the safety of distance and laugh that you actually have a vice president sitting on stage warning the Pope, God's representative here on earth for the Catholic Church, warning the Pope what he can and cannot say about theology, that he needs to be careful. Well, let me tell you something. I never hear those warnings when he's talking about abortion. I never hear those warnings when he's talking about traditional marriage. I don't hear those warnings when those warnings align with his political views. But there's a war that, let us just say, started with the killing of over 150 young girls at a school that the United States lied about initially and said, oh, we had nothing to do with that. No, that wasn't us. That was Iran. Is the Pope going to get involved in that? Is the Pope going to be concerned about that? Does the Pope think that Jesus Christ cares? Whether it's Americans or Iranians or people from other countries who are winning or losing wars? No. The Pope would probably believe, like another guy from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, that his concern is not whether we are on God's side, but whether God is on our side. And so to hear a sitting vice president of the United States, first of all, becoming a Catholic last week and then writing a book about being a Catholic and then lecturing the Pope, I've got to say, that's like an all-timer. And people are going to look back and they're going to have a big chuckle that anybody was ever that arrogant in that position.
Yeah, the history books. I often wonder, 20, 30, 40 years from now, just exactly what they'll say. This will deserve perhaps its own chapter. Yeah, there's a short list of people who probably can weigh in on matters of theology. I think the Pope probably on that list. That's just my guess. And you're right, but J.D. Vance, I will say in front of a sparsely attended crowd there at the Turning Point rally, to do that in the same speech, by the way, and we'll get to this later, I'm sure, where he said he was proud to deny funding to
Oh my
Ukraine.
gosh.
Not just that,
Is that hold on a second. Is that a Falcons football game? Can we see those? Can we see those seats again?
The smallest crowd in Atlanta since.
what just happened?
Yes.
Whoa. Since the last time the Falcons played. And I'm a huge Falcons fan, but this is Boring Points USA. Like that's not good.
No, that's not good. And certainly Vice President Vance's comments there about both Ukraine and the Pope just beyond the pale for many. So Mark Caputo, let's bring you in on this. I mean, a fifth of Americans identify as Catholic. President Trump, was criticized even by some within the GOP for his posting that depicted him as Jesus. He claimed he was a doctor. That's not true. But that hasn't stopped him from criticizing the Pope. He did it again last night. Does anyone in the White House think this is a good idea?
Well, he did pull it down. He did pull down the original post after a significant number of advisors, both inside and outside the White House, asked him not to do it. But as his True Social account shows, when Donald Trump gets animated about something, he doesn't let it go. And therefore, it was at midnight or after midnight, this sort of behavior or these sorts of thoughts come out of him and wind up on his True Social account. And there is a general sense in the White House and in Trump's broader orbit that the best thing to do is to sort of let Trump be Trump and hope he doesn't go too far outside of the guardrails. And if he does, to try to reel him back slowly. And they did that the other day. But I think the rest of this is sort of a sunken cost.
My goodness. White House reporter for Axios, Mark Caputo, thank you very much. His latest reporting for Axios on the U.S. easing bank sanctions amid Venezuela's economic woes is online now.
It has been a tough 7 days for one J.D. Vance. Last week, he went to Hungary to rally support for the re-election of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who then lost decisively on Sunday, absolutely crushed, super majority for the opposition party for the first time in 16 years. Now Vance is saying, the administration knew that would happen all along.
One of the reasons why we decided to do that, Brett, is not because, we can't read polls. We certainly knew there was a very good chance that Victor would lose that election. We didn't go because we expected Victor to cruise to an election victory. We went because it was the right thing to do, to stand behind a person who had stood by us.
Right, yes, a person who had tried to transform his country into essentially a one-party dictatorship, and which you want to do too. From Hungary, Vance was then dispatched, of course, to Pakistan to negotiate an end to the war with Iran that Donald Trump started. On his way there, he reminded everyone, this guy has no credibility and zero experience in this field.
He said, we refuse to give up the right to enrichment. And I thought to myself, you know what? My wife has the right to skydive. But she doesn't jump out of an airplane because she and I have an agreement that she's not going to do that because I don't want my wife jumping out of an airplane.
Okay, because preventing your wife from skydiving is the same as preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Also, is that a source of continued negotiation and tension in your household? Anyway, off he went to negotiate while his boss and the country's top diplomat, the guy that runs the State Department, attended a UFC fight. But once again, Vance failed to accomplish his mission.
We've been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement.
Oh, wow. Well, who could have predicted? After that string of failures, his next big move was to pick a fight with the Pope.
But I certainly think that in some cases, it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church, and let the President of the United States stick to dictating American public policy.
John Lovett is a host of Crooked Media's Love It or Leave It and co-host of Pod Save America, and he joins me now. John, I feel like there's always the threat for a vice president to become a Veep-like figure. It could be it could be a very dangerous and precarious political position because you are the number two, because you don't actually get to control your own destiny in some ways. It's you can't break with the president. And I feel like he's had a real Veep-like week this last week.
He's discovering what others have discovered in the past, which is you get into business with Donald Trump, You think you're in on the scam, but you're actually the mark the whole time. J.D. Vance thought he was so smart. You know, you're right. Other vice presidents have, I think, become Veep-like figures, but they didn't think that the president was a fraud. I don't know what Dick Cheney really thought of George W. Bush, but he certainly didn't think of him what J.D. Vance actually thought of Donald Trump. Now, I think J.D. Vance can convince himself of anything, but, you know, he is now owning his choice to associate himself with Donald Trump, a person whose character he knows well. And this is the consequence.
What did you think? I have to say, I thought I was on vacation, but things were penetrating the sort of vacation bubble. I was selectively letting them through. And I just thought that split screen of Vance is going to go negotiate with the Iranians, and come out and be like, we don't have a deal, while Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, who's the person that everyone thinks is the sort of nearest competitor, right, for the mantle, are together in a UFC fight. That felt cold to me on the part of Trump.
Yeah, look, I just think as a rule, if you're looking for flights between Budapest and Islamabad without stopping at home first, like maybe things have not gone exactly as you would have hoped. He went to Hungary, which was just about the friends he made along the way. Then he goes to Islamabad. By the way, like I'm happy to have J.D. Vance tarred with Donald Trump's failure, but it's only in the addled goldfish brain of Donald Trump that you can reach a stalemate in 15 minutes of negotiation over an incredibly complex situation. Negotiating the Obama deal with Iran took over a year, I believe. But of course it would. And now you've added in the complication of we declared war on the country over their nuclear program, which we'd already had claimed was obliterated. So, yeah, he didn't get it done in a day. That's stupid.
Yes, when he came out and said, we've been at it for 21 hours, like, again, and this was another moment where he has been so effective in his life of essentially cultivating mentors that sort of put him in positions of power and prestige and proximity, that you forget that, like, it's a real thin resume this guy has. I mean, that is no small thing to be the lead negotiator in what are the highest stakes international negotiations in since probably the Iran deal under Barack Obama. He was like a U.S. senator for half a second, and then he has his job. There's no reason to think he could do it.
Well, he's got such a great team around him, too, of course. You have Steve Witkoff there. You have Jared Kushner, who's
the son-in-law
not even part of the government.
Yeah, just a guy. Yeah,
just there, I guess, to offer, to spitball, I suppose. Yeah, it's remember the Colin Powell called it the Pottery Barn rule, which is you broke it, you bought it. Actually, I don't think that is a rule at Pottery Barn. I think they're they have more generous return policy, actually. But this is sort of the Taj Mahal rule, which is Donald Trump broke it, and it is going to be your problem, J.D. Vance, because he broke it, you bought it. And, isn't it quaint to think about his efforts in the early days of this conflict, leaking that he wasn't actually for it, as if there was some hope that he wouldn't own it. He got yelled at today from the audience at TPUSA, I believe, because he is going to be associated with this and responsible for this. A person who campaigned telling us that Kamala would be the one to take us to war in the Middle East, and Donald Trump is the person who would focus on America first. And now they have to go around trying to defend high gas prices. The best they can do is say briefly during COVID they were a little bit higher, which I don't think gets them very far. So, yeah, he's in a real bind. He thought he was a con man, and you can't con an honest man.
Yeah, we just showed the shot. They had a Turning Points USA event in Georgia today, the University of Georgia, and clearly booked an enormous venue, which is overwhelmingly empty. Here's that exchange he had with a heckler when he again was kind of going right back at the Pope. That the Pope's theology on war and peace is wrong, and then he gets interrupted. Take a listen.
Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Whoever yelled that out from the dark, he certainly does not. I think that's pretty easy. I think that's a pretty easy principle. Okay, so.
Why he's threatening genocide in Iran. And you're right. Whatever he leaked to the press is that the distance on this that's not going to get the job done.
Also, a guy that just went to Hungary to tell them how to run their country, telling an American from Chicago to focus on morality as opposed to war and peace and immigration. And like, I think he wants the Pope to just be talking about like the rhythm method, like basically just limit it to the hits. He wants the Pope on the hits. He's a guy from Chicago. Have you ever tried to get a guy from Chicago to stop talking about something he's interested in? It's not possible. He's a middle-aged Chicagoan. He's going to talk to you about Trump.
And I gotta say, it is a remarkable moment to have the first American Pope at this time with Donald. Like the Pope and Donald Trump as probably the two most famous Americans in the world. It is, and watching this moment play out is remarkable. John Lovett, always great to have you come by.
Good to see you.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better.
Well, first of all, Brett, I think the president was posting a joke, and of course he took it down because he recognized that a lot of people weren't understanding his humor in that case. I think the president of the United States likes to mix it up on social media, and I actually think that's one of the good things about this president is that he's not filtered. He doesn't send everything through a communications professional. He actually reaches out directly to the people. You know, when it comes to the disagreements with the Vatican, look, we're going to have disagreements, Brett, from time to time. I think it's a good thing, actually, that the Pope is advocating for the things that he cares about, but we're always going to have disagreements on matters of public policy, or I should say sometimes we're going to have disagreements on matters of public policy. The Pope has been critical of our immigration policy, but ultimately the immigration policy of the United States is set by Donald Trump. The Pope is going to have disagreements on other issues. We can respect the Pope. We certainly have a good relationship with the Vatican, but we're also going to disagree on substantive questions from time to time. I think that's a totally reasonable thing. It isn't particularly newsworthy.
All right, so in that clip, that is reasonable. They're going to have disagreements with the Pope, but don't criticize the Pope. Don't attack the Pope. Understand the Pope has his job, and the Pope's job, Willie, is to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. And so, when JD's telling him to mind his own business, well, he is minding his own business. One other thing, too, if I could just say, JD said, it's just a joke. No, blasphemy is not a joke. And if you don't have to take it from me, take it from some of Donald Trump's biggest apologists in the Christian community. They didn't consider that to be a joke. In fact, most of them consider it to be blasphemy. Rod Dreher, who is a conservative author, a podcaster, writer, a big name, especially in the sort of far-right Christian community. Rod said that he's not calling Donald Trump the Antichrist, but he said that it was Rod Dreher, a conservative writer who attended the Catholic baptism of Vance and loves Vance before he entered politics, went further. I'm not saying Donald Trump is the Antichrist, Dreher told the Wall Street Journal, but he's radiating the spirit of the Antichrist, no question. And believe me, again, that comes from a close friend of J.D. Vance, a strong supporter of Donald Trump, and something that every single one of these people would have said if Barack Obama had depicted himself as Jesus Christ, if George W. Bush, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, any president that preceded Donald Trump into the White House had depicted themselves as Jesus Christ. It's not a joke. It's blasphemy.
And I mean, Joe, you could play this game 10 times a day, but particularly now, what if former President Barack Obama had posted a picture of himself as Jesus? Can you imagine the wall-to-wall coverage on every network that was happy to actually, if you watched yesterday, to turn away from this story because they knew there was no good way out of it, that they couldn't buy the explanation that he was somehow a doctor. Remember when at the 2008 convention in Denver when President Obama had the columns up behind him? He's acting like he's a Greek god, and there was all this fake outrage about that. What about this? The definition of blasphemy.
Wait,
and again,
Willie,
we asked this. Yeah.
Willie, the tan suit. How many segments did they do on the tan suit? How many people were shocked that he wore the tan suit? And yet this same network doesn't do anything of note on Donald Trump saying he's Jesus Christ.
Deeply offended by the arrogance, as they saw it, of Barack Obama, but not here. And again, we've asked this of so many Republicans, Speaker Johnson, Lindsey Graham, the list goes on and on. But the fact that the Vice President of the United States has to wake up and be told, we need you to go on Fox News and defend Donald Trump, putting himself up alongside Jesus Christ, an image of himself as Jesus Christ. And the explanation always is, oh, you guys can't take a joke. That's just Trump being Trump. Well, he's not some random guy on the internet. He's not a podcaster. He's not a reality TV show host. He's not a New York socialite in the 80s anymore. He's the president of the United States. But they always find a way to twist themselves in knots to excuse or defend what he's done. Let's bring into the conversation MS Now contributor Mike Barnicle, politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico Jonathan Martin, and Washington bureau chief of USA Today, Susan Page. Her new book out today titled The Queen and Her Presidents, The Hidden Hand
It's a good one.
That Shaped History. Great book. We're going to get to that in just a moment, Susan. Mike Barnicle, let's start off with you, just this back and forth, the pathetic attempt, first of all, by the President of the United States to explain away this image of him as Jesus Christ, as him being a doctor. Of course, no one bought that. But then also the minions around him scrambling to somehow excuse what he's done here.
Well, I think everybody knows that the Pope is weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. That's to start with. Everyone also knows that, unfortunately for Donald Trump, the Pope is not a candidate for anything. He's the leader of the Holy Roman Catholic Church throughout the world. That's more than 1 billion people of faith. And the word that has not been dropped here today, and I think that the past couple of days, after we've talked about it, and Jonathan was talking about it earlier, the night-long spree of texts and Truth Social posts, Sunday morning, 13 or 14 of them, 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. And the word that ought to be applied and thought about, I think, is stability. What is the President of the United States' sense of stability? Because we're talking about someone who has done some crazy things. And likening himself to Christ in that post that he put up and then withdrew and claiming, well, it's a doctor. I'm supposed to be a doctor in that. That's just so, it's beyond absurd. And we have a war going on that we don't know where it's going to end. And the word stability, I think, ought to be underlined each and every hour of the day in this presidency.
So Jay Mort, you have, of course, Donald Trump. Some of his strongest supporters obviously come from the evangelical community. I mean, he's president of the United States because of white evangelicals. Also, conservative Catholics also have been a bedrock of his support. And of the Republican Party support, going back to Ronald Reagan when working class Catholics first started voting Republican in 1980. In this case, though, it was a 1-2 punch. He attacks the Pope late in the evening and then posts a picture of himself early in the morning as Jesus Christ. And again, I will say, if you've ever stepped into an evangelical church, I'm sorry, nobody considers that a joke. Somebody putting themselves up as Jesus Christ. I could name 10 Bible verses telling you right now. No, that's crossing the line. That's crossing the line in a way you never do. So I'm curious your reaction when you saw that the night before he undermines his support among Catholics by attacking the Pope, and in the morning among evangelicals and Catholics and any Christians depicting himself as Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, it's like he was planning on a third punch against maybe the LDS Church or like the third leg of his stool, the coalition. Yeah. Who else can I offend? My experience, having done this now for over 10 years covering Trump, there's certain cues to look for when the rationalizers, the apologists, are really all out of excuses, guys. And the go-to when there's just nothing else to say, because you can't defend the indefensible, is he was just joking. I was just kidding. Well, I don't think he was joking about going negative on the Pope, and that's what he did. He attacked the Cardinal of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, I should say, for his crime policies. What does that even mean? The Swiss Guards? I mean, it's so bizarre. But look, there's not much for his folks to say. If you're Vance, you don't want to have to go out and explain that at all. Because it's the most thankless assignment in the world. But it does go to the heart, Joe, as you mentioned, of his coalition eroding. Because, look, the dead enders out there are going to find a way to rationalize everything. He was joking around. You guys can't take a joke. He always punches back. That's another good chestnut is if you attack him, he will counterpunch. You always hear that one, too. But ultimately, it's embarrassing. And it's embarrassing for people who otherwise would never vote for a Democrat. They don't want to vote for a Democrat. Just give them any reason to keep voting with the Republican line, and they'll take it. But they don't want to have to keep apologizing and defending and explaining this behavior because it's embarrassing to them and their families and their communities. They won't say it like that, Joe, but you and I know that is really the issue here. It's humiliating for his supporters.
Yeah, the behavior is embarrassing, and then President Trump's explanation is insulting Susan Page to the intelligence of anybody, including those who voted for him. And it's received widespread condemnation. The Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who is usually a relatively favorable, Trump ally, she said that she found the President Trump's remarks about the Holy Father unacceptable. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and it is right and proper that he call for peace and condemn all forms of war. And, of course, the Vatican there in Italy's backyard. Susan, it's also striking to me that I think that the Pope strikes a particular nerve for President Trump. And we know he doesn't handle criticism well from anybody. But with the Pope, this Pope, an American Pope, I think for Trump, it's difficult for him to understand. Suddenly there's a counterweight out there. There's another American whose voice, far quieter than President Trump's, but carries just as much influence.
Two things have happened that we've never seen before. Presidents and popes have had their differences before over issues of war, over issues of abortion rights, but we've never had a president take on the Pope in the kind of direct and very political way that President Trump did, and we've never had a Pope punch back in such a direct way. The Pope was clearly not cowed or really taken aback or intimidated by what Trump said. He came back and talked to reporters with cameras about his reaction to the president. And as you said, the fact that he's the first American Pope, speaks English, talks directly to Americans in a way no previous Pope has ever been able to do, that is an important thing to keep in mind when you think about the political consequences of what we've had now in this dispute.
I think his explanation, too, that this is me as a doctor, I make people better, is a political gift for Democrats. They can touch off that in a number of ways. Jonathan.
Very excited. I was waiting 16 years for this day.
I don't know. I hope now change and good change, but not only in Hungary, around the world. It's not normal now.
He had all the opportunities to make Hungary great again. This is a very common phrase now, but he missed this chance, definitely.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. At times over the past few years, in those darkest moments, it's felt all but inevitable, that methodic, creeping descent into an authoritarian future, not just here in the United States, but around the world. Today, though, just as Donald Trump's vice grip over our American system starts to slip away, people halfway around the world are likewise rejecting those autocratic impulses and tendencies and embracing, or rather re-embracing, a bold new vision. This weekend, against all odds, voters in Hungary ended the 16-year reign of far-right Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Among the reasons it was such a stunning result, and tell us if this sounds at all familiar to you, Orban manipulated the country's election system and initiated a takeover of its media outlets. And yet, this was the scene last night. Among the shouts from the crowd, quote, "Russians go home." Indeed, Vladimir Putin was an advocate for Orban. So, too, was Donald Trump, who even went so far as to dispatch his vice president, J.D. Vance, to campaign in Hungary last week for Orban. Our friend Ann Applebaum put it like this, quote, Orban's loss brings to an end the assumption of inevitability that has pervaded the MAGA movement, as well as the belief, also present in Russian President Vladimir Putin's rhetoric, that illiberal parties are somehow destined not just to win, but to hold power forever because they have the support of, quote unquote, real people. As it turns out, history doesn't work like that. Real people grow tired of their rulers. Old ideas become stale. Younger people question orthodoxy. Illiberalism leads to corruption. And if Orban can lose, then his Russian and American admirers can lose too. To be clear, Orban's replacement is no liberal. He's a center-right politician. And while he will likely scale back some of his predecessors' more autocratic policies, some things, like Hungary's approach to immigration, will likely stay more or less the same. But the point is this, made so eloquently by historian Tim Snyder, quote, just as Hungary once offered the international oligarchical far right the confidence that a formula had been found, it now offers to men such as Vance and Trump the anxiety that voting might actually make a difference, that democracy might actually turn out to be more than a slogan, that unpredictable change is still possible, that the future is open. That is where we begin the hour with some of our most favorite experts and friends. Joining us from Budapest, staff writer for The Atlantic, Isaac Stanley Becker is here. Also joining us, senior political analyst, our dear friend Alex Wagner. She reported on the dismantling of democracy in Hungary under Orban for her podcast, Trumpland. She's now a contributing host on Pod Save America and the host of the podcast, Runaway Country. Also joining us, our dear friend, political analyst, former Senator Claire McCaskill. Isaac, because you're there, I'm going to start with you. Tell me what you're hearing and seeing and reporting.
It's been an extraordinary 24 hours. I think the scenes on the streets really say it all in terms of the jubilation, the euphoria we're seeing. Spoke to people last night and early this morning who felt as if they had taken their last chance to really step back from the abyss, that if Orban had been reelected, that would have been it for democracy in Hungary, that he would have continued this kind of consolidation of power, the entrenchment of these patronage networks, crony capitalism, and they would have lost their chance. But they took this chance, and as you said, despite the odds, really showed that voting is still powerful, even in a very unfair system.
Isaac, what impact, if any, did J.D. Vance's visit have?
This was a subject of so much fascination and chatter here. In recent days, I spoke to some Western diplomats in Budapest who speculated that it may have backfired for a number of reasons. I mean, the Trump administration's war in Iran is deeply unpopular in Europe. And I think there was also a suggestion made to me that welcoming any foreign leader could have backfired because the whole basis of Orban's campaign was Hungarian sovereignty and nationalism. So why is he campaigning with the vice president of a foreign country? We don't have polling that fleshes this out, but we certainly know that it did not pull Orban over the finish line, which is what Trump and Vance wanted. But I think that it's been, a really hectic couple days with the results last night and the whole system change. But just to step back and just, remember how unusual that moment was to see J.D. Vance here. I mean, American vice presidents and presidents just have not done this. They have not traveled to foreign countries at the expense of U.S. taxpayers and campaigned so overtly for, politicians in foreign countries, and especially not politicians who also enjoy the support of the Kremlin. It was frankly a surreal scene.
I mean, Alex, it's like the axis of Putin-backed autocrats, and to make that such a public brand and then to have it backfire, it's like the jokes write themselves. How politically toxic is J.D. Vance? He's so toxic, he dislodged a Putin-aligned 16-year autocrat from Hungary.
Yes. I mean, I don't think J.D. Vance helped matters. I don't think the war helped matters. But, Nicole, I was there last year, and This is a testament to the tireless and brave work of journalists who basically left consolidated oligarchical state propaganda outlets and formed independent news media outlets and continued the brave work of reporting on the corruption, the breathtaking corruption in Orban's Hungary. It is the work of activists who are out on the streets every week protesting at their own peril amid swarms of riot police, every week saying, we will not stand for this. This is not democracy. We want freedom. Young people who refuse to give up, people who are advocates for a more transparent governance, who are monitoring corruption in terms of the purse strings that Orban controlled and consolidated when he came back to power. I mean, this is the work of grassroots networks that have been operating honestly without a lot of money, a lot of attention, and I think not a ton of hope as far as the international community was concerned, but they kept at it. And without their work, without those foundational efforts, this victory wouldn't have been possible. Magyar, I think, seized on really important issues like the quality of healthcare in Hungary, the economy, and Orban's abysmal shepherding of it, and education, which is also an issue in Hungary. But really, the people that primed the pump, if you will, the people that did the hard work of helping him claim victory were all these ordinary, everyday Hungarian citizens who just refused to give up. And it is, I think, their win more than almost anybody else's.
I mean, it's impossible, right, as an American, desperately rowing toward the pro-democratic forces in our country to prevail, to resist the temptation to ask what worked. So I won't. I mean, Alex, just say a little more about what you started to say about how the media bravely covered the corruption outside of the state takeover of media.
Yeah, well, I mean, Orban, through his cronies, basically consolidated or shut down all the national news outlets in the country and turned them into state mouthpieces. And journalists resigned en masse, and they decided to form their own independent outlets. Like Telex is one that is super important in terms of independent investigative journalism, Direct 36. These are organizations that were, public, funded by the donations from interested readers. And these journalists did real investigative work that actually, I do think, turned the dial up, turned the heat up on Orban in a meaningful way. You had people that worked for organizations like K-Monitor that monitored the just insane levels of corruption at every level of the Hungarian government, and did so for years. For years, they documented this stuff. And they also showed the Hungarian public what it was like to have functioning local level governance, so that they could contrast what it looked like to have a functioning government with one that was completely beholden to corrupt actors. And, then there's just the people that stayed interested and stayed awake, that were just normal Hungarian citizens who refused to give in to Orban's iron will. And I think, we can blame J.D. Vance and Trump and the war and all that, but this really is a collective effort that should give all of us in the United States who want to turn off the news and just forget about what's happening and focus on our own discrete lives, which is an understandable instinct of self-preservation. This should give us pause, because actually staying alert to the degradation of our democracy, and that's what Hungarians did. And look at the outcome over there.
Claire McCaskill, 65% of Americans disapprove of Donald Trump. And on the sort of psychology of power, on the ferocity of political and prosecutorial retribution, Trump still has a stranglehold over every elected Republican in the country, with the exception of Thomas Massie and, I guess, ex-office holders, people like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. I can't count five. What is your sense of how the Democratic Party can take the best lessons from what is happening over a much longer experiment, if you will, an autocratic rule, and apply them ahead of the midterms and the next presidential?
Well, first, I think the most encouraging thing about this is the propaganda didn't work. Imagine the amount of heft that was behind the state media in Hungary. And I cannot even explain how they trashed the guy that won. I mean, he was everything from a pedophile to a thief to all of it. They said things that without any factual basis, and none of it worked. So that's encouraging. And the Democrats should take encouragement from that. And everyone should support independent journalists also in this country. But Democrats need to understand Orban lost because he was deeply, deeply unpopular. And I think the guy who beat him understood that all of his policies weren't unpopular. He was just deeply unpopular. And we have the same situation in America now. So I think it's really important that the Democrats let that simmer, Trump's unpopularity, because he's now kind of in a free fall. He's doing really stupid stuff. I mean, the fact that he took down his picture of him as Jesus as quickly as he did, that is not the Trump we know. He clearly is off his game. So let that stew. And Democrats need to stay focused like a laser on how to disrupt the status quo in a way that reassures Americans they're looking out for them. For the families that can't make it all come out even at the end of the month. For the families that are going into debt on credit cards just to buy their medicine. There are literally 40% of America is living paycheck to paycheck right now. That's what the Democrats need to stay focused on and not get distracted. Yes, it's so tempting just to hammer Trump all day long, but they really need to stay focused on a laser that they are an alternative to somebody who's deeply unpopular that will, in fact, deliver some results for Americans who are so frustrated right now with everybody that's in government.